Welcome to Chapter 4 of Sherlock Holmes, The Case of the Silent Sovereign, a 12-part Sherlock Holmes mystery. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the story unfold. If you missed the previous chapter, please visit to my channel and enjoy the journey of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 4. The Rival's Grudge. The following day, a thick yellow fog blanketed London, a choking miasma that turned the familiar streets into a landscape of ghosts and shadows. It was a day for quiet contemplation by the fireside, but Holmes was not a man to be deterred by the weather. He was eager to pursue the most logical and therefore most suspect thread in our tangled skein of evidence. Mr. Silas Thorne. "Lestrade will have already been to see him, no doubt," Holmes said, as we buttoned our greatcoats. "He will have blustered and threatened, and he will have learned nothing. It is time for a more subtle approach." Our destination was a modest terraced house in the less fashionable, though still respectable, neighborhood of Pimlico. The house, like its owner, seemed to have an air of perpetual grievance. The paint was peeling, the front garden was neglected, and the windows were grimy. It was a world away from the polished elegance of the Finch residence. We were admitted by a tired-looking housekeeper who led us to a cramped and cluttered laboratory at the back of the house. The room was a chaotic jumble of scientific equipment, books, and papers. Unlike Lord Finch's laboratory, which had been a model of order and precision, this was a space of frantic, disorganized energy. Beakers and retorts jostled for space on stained workbenches, and piles of books threatened to collapse at any moment. In the midst of this chaos stood Silas Thorne. He was a tall, stooped man with a shock of unruly gray hair and a face that seemed to be permanently etched with an expression of bitter disappointment. His eyes, however, were sharp and intelligent, and they fixed upon us with a look of wary suspicion as we entered. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice a low, resentful growl. "I have already had a visit from the esteemed Inspector Lestrade. I have told him everything I know, which is nothing. I have nothing more to say." "I am not here as a representative of the police, Mr. Thorne," Holmes replied, his tone calm and reassuring. "I am here as a seeker of truth. And I believe you are a man who values the truth above all else." Thorne snorted, a harsh, cynical sound. "The truth? The truth is that Alistair Finch was a thief and a charlatan. He built his career on the work of other men. He stole my research, my ideas, and he passed them off as his own. That is the truth." The animosity in his voice was raw and palpable. This was a man who had been nursing a grudge for many years, a man who felt that life had dealt him a profound and unforgiving injustice. "You refer to your dispute over the principles of acoustic resonance?" Holmes asked, his gaze sweeping over the cluttered laboratory. "He stole it all," Thorne said, his voice rising with passion. "My theories, my calculations, he took them, he published them under his own name, and the Royal Society, that collection of fools and sycophants, they lauded him as a genius. And I was forgotten." He slumped into a chair, the fire of his anger momentarily extinguished, leaving only the cold ashes of despair. "I hated him. Yes, I admit it. I hated him with every fiber of my being. But I did not kill him." "Where were you on the night of Lord Finch's death?" Holmes asked, his question gentle but persistent. Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "I was here. Working, as I always am." "Can anyone corroborate that?" I asked. He shot me a look of contempt. "My housekeeper can attest that I did not leave the house." "But she was in her own rooms at the top of the house. She cannot swear that I was in this laboratory for the entire evening. Lestrade has already pointed that out. It is a weak alibi, I know, but it has the virtue of being the truth." Holmes had begun to wander through the laboratory, his eyes taking in the details of Thorne's own research. He paused at a workbench, where a complex and delicate piece of equipment was assembled. "You are working on the transmission of electrical signals through a vacuum," Holmes observed, A fascinating field. You believe it is possible to transmit information without the use of wires. Thorn looked up, a flicker of pride in his eyes. It is more than possible. It is inevitable. It will change the world. But it is a slow and arduous process, especially for a man of my limited means. Finch, with his wealth and his connections, he could have achieved it in a fraction of the time. The bitterness had returned to his voice. That was his true genius, you see. Not in the realm of ideas, but in the realm of acquisition. He knew how to take the work of others and make it his own.
Of the laboratory, I took the opportunity to observe Thorn more closely. He was a man consumed by his own sense of failure, a man who saw the world through a lens of resentment. He had the motive, and he had the scientific knowledge to have conceived of a subtle and untraceable method of murder. He was, in many ways, the perfect suspect. Our interview was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, the door to the laboratory burst open, and Inspector Lestrade strode into the room, a look of triumph on his face. He was flanked by 2 burly constables. "Silas Thorn," Lestrade announced, his voice ringing with authority. "I am arresting you for the murder of Lord Alistair Finch." Thorn stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. "On what grounds?" "You have no evidence." "I have motive," Lestrade declared. "And I have this." He produced a small sealed jar from his pocket. Inside, I could see a dark crystalline substance. "We searched your pantry, Mr. Thorn, and we found this. Aconite, a fast-acting poison that can induce cardiac arrest, a poison that, in small doses, can be difficult to detect." Thorn leaped to his feet, his face pale with a mixture of fear and outrage. "That is preposterous. I use that for my research. It is a reagent. I have never used it for any other purpose." "A likely story," Lestrade sneered. "You will have plenty of time to perfect it in prison." The constables moved forward and took Thorn by the arms. He struggled for a moment, his eyes wild with desperation. "This is a mistake. I am innocent. Holmes, tell them. You know I am innocent." Holmes had remained silent throughout the dramatic scene, his face a mask of calm contemplation. He now turned to Lestrade, a thoughtful expression in his eyes. "You have your man, Inspector," he said, his voice neutral. "A neat and tidy solution." "Indeed," Lestrade said, puffing out his chest. "A simple case of professional jealousy. It is a motive as old as time he and his constables led the protesting Thorn out of the room. We could hear his desperate cries of innocence echoing down the hallway until they were finally silenced by the closing of the front door." A heavy silence descended on the cluttered laboratory. The chaos of the room seemed to be a reflection of the chaos in my own mind. Lestrade's case was compelling. He had a suspect with a strong motive, a weak alibi, and the means to commit the crime. And yet, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Well, Holmes," I said, turning to my friend, "it seems that Lestrade has solved the case." "Do you believe him?" Holmes had walked to the window and was staring out at the fog-shrouded street. He did not answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "Lestrade has found a solution that is both simple and satisfying," he said, "and he may well be right. Thorn is a man consumed by bitterness. He is capable of hatred and perhaps of murder. But the evidence is convenient, almost too convenient." He turned from the window, and I saw that he was holding the small brass screw that he had taken from Lord Finch's laboratory. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, his eyes narrowed in thought. "Aconite is a clumsy poison, Watson," he said. "It causes a violent and painful death. It does not fit with the peaceful scene that Lady Finch described. And it does not explain the locked room, or the missing plans, or the mark of the empty crown." He paused, and his gaze fell upon a small detail that I had overlooked. On the corner of Thorn's workbench, tucked beneath a pile of papers, was a small, framed photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, her face bright with a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. Holmes picked up the photograph, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Who is this, I wonder?" He turned the frame over, and on the back, written in a neat, feminine hand, were the words, "To my dearest Silas, with all my love, Eleanor." A man who is loved is rarely a man who is consumed by hate, Watson, Holmes murmured, his voice soft. He may be bitter, he may be resentful, but the kind of cold, calculated rage required for a murder of this nature, it requires a heart that is truly empty. He placed the photograph back on the desk, his movements gentle and deliberate. Lestrade has his man. But I am not convinced. There is a deeper game being played here, Watson. Thorn is not the killer. He is a pawn, a scapegoat. He has been carefully and deliberately framed. He looked at me, his eyes shining with a renewed sense of purpose. The real killer is still out there, and he is far more clever and far more dangerous than Silas Thorn. Our work is not over, my dear fellow. It has only just begun,